with SharePoint for business applications. Our presenter today is Anthony Birk. He's got 15 years of experience in the software world. He's been working in SharePoint 2010 and MOS over the last 7 or 8 years. Specifically in the last couple of years, he's been working on SharePoint 2010 and Silverlight, developing large solutions for clients. He's delivered 5 over the last year with about 20 in total. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Tony, and he'll take over and run the seminar. Tony?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to attempt to move you into the realm of easily using Silverlight to build business applications. There are a lot of different technologies out there to integrate with SharePoint, and the question would be exactly why Silverlight. As I've been running through different clients and different projects over the course of the last couple of years, I've found a general not willingness to take on the learning curve of Silverlight in the SharePoint 2010 environment. And certainly it was much more difficult in 2007, but with the integration of Visual Studio 2010, Silverlight 4, and SharePoint 2010, the development process has become a lot easier. As I learned it myself in the beginning, I had a hard time finding a single place through constant Googling of where I could find out how to set up my first project, how to get it connected to SharePoint, how can I debug it, and then how do I deal with the various pitfalls, specifically around asynchronous threading and the other various threading issues that come with Silverlight. The application that we're demoing today is a very simple one. It is nothing more than a standard context list in SharePoint and our ability to connect to it and get data from it. The reason to use Silverlight, because in this particular example, not being very advanced for the purposes of what we're doing here, it begs the question, why not use Path? Why not use just SharePoint itself? And the answer is that InfoPath doesn't quite generate the kind of power that you have with the Silverlight UI and the .NET framework behind it and your ability to control your environment. In addition, with SharePoint and other things, there are various levels and complexities of deployment issues. And I find that the Silverlight model, by developing individual components in Silverlight, the deployment is way easier than in a standard development environment. So the first thing that I would like to do is walk through setting up the Visual Studio 2010 environment to be able to connect to SharePoint. And what I have here is a basic SharePoint site, standard team site that I'm sure everybody has seen 1,000 times. And in here I have created a very basic list. Just a very basic context list, something that somebody would have seen 1,000,000 times also. Now the goal will be, at this point then, how can I take this list and turn it into a data grid that I can then manipulate in Silverlight and extend. Now I would like to start out first by saying that I am running Microsoft SharePoint 2010 on my Windows 7 laptop. To be able to develop and debug against SharePoint, your development environment does need to be on an instance of SharePoint. There are a lot of different ways to do that. Lots of people implement virtual machines, everything else, but it is fairly straightforward to install SharePoint 2010 on Windows 7, and as you will see, that is what I have here. So I am going to go ahead and start with opening, Visual Studio. And beginning to start a new project from a new solution from the get-go to be able to connect to SharePoint and hook up a Silverlight application. So we want to start a new project. And the first thing that we are going to do is create a Silverlight application. And I'm going to call this Silverlight application. As we want to create a data grid to display the information from our contacts list, I'm going to call it Contacts Grid. I'm going to call it Contacts Grid 2. This first screen is one of the first whoopsies that everybody makes. We do not want to host Silverlight in its own website. We are going to set it up so that when we debug, it brings up SharePoint instead of an individual site to be able to do our hosting. The first step is to hit that screen, hit OK. And here we are. Here's our opening Silverlight, and you see that Silverlight projects have the same very basic look and feel as regular WPF or other C# projects that you're used to. And the main page, of course, is main page with the code behind of a CS file. The .xaml page is where you do the designing of your Silverlight web part, and the code behind is where we, link everything up and perform our events. Excuse me. Now, the first thing that we want to do after creating this blank project is we want to create a deployment project so that we can send it to SharePoint, and so that we can link it up and do debugging. So the first thing that we do right off the bat is we add another project. And in this particular case, what we're going to do is we're going to create an empty SharePoint 2010 project, and we're going to call it Deploy. This will be the project that we use to link up and deploy our final XAP files that are the compiled versions of the Silverlight. It's important to note here that on the get-go, you do enter in your local SharePoint site and validate it to make sure that your Visual Studio can connect to it. And also the deploy a sandbox solution. The sandbox solution and the deployment of Silverlight I will get into more in a little bit, but you'll find that one of the great parts about it is that it is very non-intrusive to do an update to a production site. And I will demonstrate that shortly. All right, so at this point now we have two projects, our contacts grid and our deployment project. We want to now link these up so that the contacts grid gets automatically deployed to SharePoint. At this time, also I'm going to bring up Sharepoint Designer, and I'm going to open our demo site. And typically what we want to do is we want to create a folder in the opening part, in the base part of the website, that we're going to store our XAP files. If you look in here, I have created an SL folder, and underneath that you'll see that I already have two, which I'm going to delete now, XAPs in there. And this is the area that we want our files to be deployed to. And that way we always have a common path for how to get there. Lowering this, I'm going to go into deployment and I'm going to add an item, and what I'm going to do is add a module. And I'm going to call it contacts grid to deploy. At this point, it adds the elements file and a sample file that we first immediately delete. Now we're going to want to tell this project that we want to deploy our feature to Sharepoint. So our project output references, and that's the only reason why we have this. We go in here and we add, and we say that we want to be able to deploy Project Grid 2. And my apologies here. And it's also important to note that we want to deploy it as an element file. And we want to pick Contact Grid 2, which is the actual project that we're deploying. And we want to specify, automatically by default, it's going to want to call it by the project name. We want, for every project that we're going to deploy, we want it to go into the SL folder. At this point, now, there's one other main important part to note about the deployment project. And in there, in the properties, we want to go to Sharepoint, and we want to click Enable Silverlight Debugging. And that is what wires it up with Sharepoint so that we are able to hit the debug button and it will allow us to step through our code asynchronous. You see here it creates the elements file that gets deployed. There's our XAP file where it will land, and there's the directory that it will go. We are done with the deployment project at that time. So now we can go into this and quickly just drag something onto it. Just to be able to do our initial hello world type application. So we're going to say, okay. And we're going to make our width equal to 150. And it looks like we probably better specify a height of. And there we are. At this point, right now, we can right-click on deployment, and we can hit deploy. And you see that it builds the file, creates a solution that also copies the file out to the directory. You can see it if you do it twice. You see on this second time around that found one deployment conflict, resolving conflicts, there is our XAP file that we have just deployed. Now the great part about this is that we have just deployed a Silverlight project out to Sharepoint. Visual Studio has automatically detected that there was a file out there that existed already, deleted it and re-added it, and as this is a sandbox solution, it did not require any kind of reset of IIS or anything else. So now we go Sharepoint Designer, and we refresh the page, and we see our context grid is now under our SL. Wanting to see this then, if we go to and create a new web part page, this is how easy it is to add a Silverlight Web part that we have just built to a SharePoint site. We say we want to add a new web part page. And we're going to call it demo. And we'll go ahead and give it, and we'll just store it in our site pages. Right off the bat then now we have a new web part page in our SharePoint implementation. And we can go ahead, click Add Web Part, Media and Content, Silverlight Web Part, Add. The URL is always going to be the same general path. It should be sites, demo, SL, and then the name of our package we find here, contextgrid2.xap. And there we are. There's our button. We also may want to do some customizations where we come in here and we say, okay, I don't want to call it Silverlight Web Part. I want to call it and I would like the, I'd like it to be a little bigger. I'm going to make it 800 by 600. There we are. When we stop editing, at this point, we have a web part page in SharePoint that we can browse to very quickly. So we can add a link to the side or whatever we want to do, but under Site Pages Demo, Hello World, our blank project comes up. Now we probably want this thing to be a little more interesting. So back in our site, once again, we have created a list, and we have had people go out and fill in our contacts list, various information, and we want to be able to display a data grid of this information that we can manipulate, add buttons to, sort, do, and use that as the starting place for how we can move around with our data. I'm going to go ahead then and pull up our Silverlight project. And at this point, we are able to deploy and we are able to debug. As soon as my laptop catches up here. Okay. And in here, let's go ahead and let's change our SAML. And let's just add a basic grid, a Silverlight control data grid. And we'll delete our button. And we will call it data grid contacts. And we will also set up the grid for demonstration purposes to go ahead and auto-generate columns. The reason why we're doing this is that the amount of material out in the world, books, Google, otherwise, there's quite a bit of material to be able to learn building rich UI with Silverlight. And that's not really the goal of what I'm attempting to do here. What I'm trying to do is get everybody up and running so that they can connect their Silverlight UI with SharePoint as quickly and as painlessly as possible. So we're just going to have a basic data grid as our example. Also, what we're going to have to do at this point is we're going to have to add a reference to the Silverlight SharePoint objects. You can find these in program files, common files, Microsoft Shared, web server extensions, 14 template layouts, client bin, buried way down there. Both of these we need, the Silverlight runtime and the Silverlight SharePoint client. References, we are now able to put in our using to be able to connect to SharePoint. On the main page, the most common task with any SharePoint functionality is you're going to be reading from or writing to SharePoint lists. What we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to create a basic object to hold the data that is in our contacts data grid. To do this, I actually like to create a separate project. There are many ways to create a data layer for Silverlight, web services, etc. However, for the purposes of this demonstration, really you can do everything within Silverlight. So I'm going to add another solution, or add another project, and I'm going to call it Business Layer. And this does not need to be deployed, as it is going to be referenced over here. So we're going to go into Business Layer also, and we're going to add our Silverlight References. It is going to be under Program Files, Files, Microsoft Shared, Web Server Extensions, 14, Template, Layouts, Client Bin. Just to make sure, I believe, very quickly, my apologies, I'm going to add that solution again. I believe that I did, pay attention, this is a Silverlight solution. And as I'm re-adding this, I have to delete it out of Visual Studio. My apology for the delay. Okay. Add our Silverlight References. All right, and in the contacts grid, we want to reference our business layer. And we're now able to create some basic classes to hold our SharePoint objects. So here I'm going to do I'm going to add a folder, and I'm going to call it List Classes. I'm going to create in here a new list class. And I'm going to call it, let's see, we'll call it Contact. Item. And in this item, we're just going to have some of the basic properties that hold our fields. So, very quickly, already have those ready to go. And now we have a basic class to hold our content. By the book, when you go into any Silverlight development book with SharePoint or anywhere on Microsoft's site or in Google, they're going to show you pretty much the same deal, which is going to be this. You're going to have your 4 main objects that you use to connect to SharePoint. Those objects are your client context, your SharePoint list, your list item collection, and your camel query object. We'll put those at the top here. And we have a data grid that we're going to have to set an item source to. Silverlight, in Silverlight development, you're going to become very familiar with the observable collection. And that requires system collections object model. And I need to also add our business layer. All right, and what we're saying is we're going to create an observable collection of type contacts items. Observable collection implements iProperty notify, and that is crucial in the Silverlight world as everything operates in different threads. There will be the UI thread and there will be the worker thread, and threading in Silverlight can get extremely complicated. However, the idea of the observable collection, and what I'll show you a little later, which is the iNotify interface, is that you are able to tell the UI thread in these objects are able to report behind the scenes when their properties have changed. And so now we begin the part of loading data grid items. We're going to go in here, and as you can see, we've got a basic grid in here. Did have a basic grid, and I am not. All right, I will add my grid again. And in our code behind, here we are. So we're going to go ahead and from the beginning, we're going to set our data grid next to our observable connection, even before we've filled it. Do that by selecting the item source. Now the idea of binding the data grid item source to the observable collection before we've filled the collection is important, as that when the collection is first found, it will be empty. And then the observable collection, as it fills, will notify the UI thread that its properties have changed, and Silverlight will automatically wire that up so that the page loads first and then the data loads asynchronously in later. This is what you will see standard for, once again, just about in any SharePoint book. The first thing you do is create your client context, and you connect to your site. From there, you create your list object, and you get the list by title. Our list is contacts. Then you create a generic camel query. I'll get to that in a second. And then you tell the context that you want to get a collection of list items from this query, and you have the context execute this query asynchronously, which means that you have to have the succeeded and the failed events. As this is an asynchronous call, it needs callbacks to fill. We will go ahead and add those. All right, now you see we have a basic page where we're telling SharePoint, get our list of items. When it returns, come down here, fill our contacts with the fields, and add the items to the items list. Now, as you can see in here, I purposely created my field names with spaces in them so you could understand a little bit what SharePoint field names look like. As you can see, street address right here has the X0020 in it, but if you look at our list, you just see street address. Finding out what the internal field name for SharePoint lists is tricky right out of the box. There are a couple tricks to do it, but there is one indispensable tool that will help you out greatly, and it's called the U2U Camel Builder. And I will show that here. This was indispensable in SharePoint 2007, and it still works for SharePoint 2010. You connect to your site with this camel query building, U2U, and it can be found very quickly on Google. We go to our contacts list. We say new query, and we're going to tell it that we just want to give us everything where ID is null. Will give us every field in the list. Oops, sorry, this is not null. There we go. So at this point now, we can see the field names of our address, and that's important because in our application, we're going to need to specify those fields when we grab them. And I'm going to use this part right here, the dispatcher begin invoke, as a demonstration in a second. But by the book, this is what you need to do straight out the bat to be able to fill a data grid in Silverlight from SharePoint. And let's see if let's see how it runs on our first go. Oh, probably be important to tell us to do it. As you'll be able to see, at this point, you debug by going to the deployment project and hitting Start New Instance. It will go ahead and compile it and deploy the site out to SharePoint and pull up your SharePoint site. We go to Site Pages, Demo, and you can see it hits our breakpoint. So we are able to debug Silverlight in SharePoint, which is huge. This is not something that was easily done in the past. All right, and we can step through it, and we can see that as it reaches even its asynchronous calls, it walks through and it fills our items as expected, and the end result is a good one. This is something I purposely set up so that we could see. Oh, no, I didn't. This is a different one. That would be... this problem right here. I forgot. My apologies, I did not instigate my observable collection. However, at this point, we see that it fills. We are able to deploy it quickly to our server with a single button, and we are able to pull up on our home page our list. Very quickly fills. Now, just straight off the bat, this is pretty nice. You're very quickly able to build and link up SharePoint objects with Silverlight, and that is the most of the magic to it, setting it up out of the box. But these asynchronous calls can be a little cumbersome, and obviously in this page, looking at this, you don't want to have to do all of this every single time you want to pull information from SharePoint. And I would also like to point out right now, too, one of the quick pitfalls of Silverlight, and I'll show that right now. We would normally expect that we would just be able to add these items to our above observable collection. It makes perfect sense that as we loop through, we can add these items. The problem is that at this point, items has been bound to the data grid in the UI. However, this that's running back here is happening on the worker thread. And what you'll see when this happens, all right, I'll go ahead and put it right here, and we do our debug. Unauthorized access exception. When you begin doing Silverlight programming with SharePoint, you are going to see this a lot. And what it is basically saying is that we've got two different threads that are attempting to access this same object, and we can't do it. That would be the reason right here for the dispatcher. And essentially what it tells code to do is to run this addition in the current thread, the UI thread, and not in the worker thread, so that all these objects are now running on the same thread and it is able to fill. All right. Once again, pretty straightforward, pretty easy. However, I've seen a lot of pitfalls getting up to that point. Now let's discuss a little advanced functionality. I have a few more projects here similar to the last one that we were looking at. The exact same setup as before. However, in my business layer, I've created a few more classes. I have our original contacts item base class here, as you see. However, in this particular case, there are a lot of things that can be done with attributes in Silverlight, and also especially implementing the iProperty notify, which allows your objects to notify the UI when they have been filled, so that you don't have to continually use the dispatcher over and over again to update your UI as you move along. So in this particular case, and I will show you what I mean by that here shortly. In this particular case, we have our same object. I have also created another object called Contact Item Expanded. And that is using a base class that I've created called Sharepoint List Item. There's a lot of code in here, and all this will be available to anybody who would like to see it. But these base classes are going to be the key to being able to quickly develop Silverlight applications against SharePoint without having to go through a lot of fuss. And you can see right here what we have is our base class called Sharepoint List Item, and it implements iProperty notify changed. this is the property that this is the interface I was telling you about. That is the same interface that Observable Collections use to notify the UI that they've been updated when they've been filled. As you're moving through and filling things from SharePoint asynchronously, you don't want to have to wait until and find out when SharePoint is done filling its objects to be able to notify the UI that you have updates to do. You want the UI to automatically update itself as its properties are filled. And it's this iNotify property change and then also observable collections that allow you to do this. So I have the same properties in here as you see before. Oh, apologies here. List classes. Contact items expanded. Same properties that we saw before, except at this particular point I'm implementing a few things. Right now the contacts item expanded is implementing the SharePoint list item class, base class, and I have expanded class with attributes and with the property change handler that allows it to notify the UI when it's been updated. This is the main difficulty with Silverlight. These are the problems that you will run into, and with these kind of back-end object designs, this is what will make SharePoint development much easier. So as you can see here, all the same properties, but they are implementing the extender method of property change handler. Go to this definition, and in here, it is invoking the iNotify property changed event and telling the UI every time a property is changed, hey, I've been updated. That way the data grid knows that it can fill itself without you having to explicitly tell it. In order to do that, you do have to implement quite a bit, but as you can see in the SharePoint list item, I have implemented all the objects needed to be able to work with the SharePoint object model to add, get, and update individual objects. By also implementing over here in my base class the SharePoint list field attribute and the SharePoint list name attribute, I am basically going in here and I am setting attributes that we can put on our collections and on our classes that let us know what list we're calling. So as you can see, this is the SharePoint list name attribute that allows us to put this right here. And the same thing with the field attribute. We're giving it a field name and whether or not the field is updatable. And that is allowing us to enter this right here. The purpose of this and why we go through it, one is that Silverlight uses attributes, this top level attribute, the display name, to automatically fill in the labels in your Silverlight UI fields for data forms, data grids, everything else. It will automatically take what you have in your object here and put that, so you do not have to explicitly define what your field names are. You can do it within your object. The other part that is important in this scenario is that we are able to generate reusable objects that use reflection so that you no longer have to go through the pain of saying this object equals SharePoint this field name. These field names are defined in the list field and whether or not they're updatable. And then what happens when this is all done is you can create a collection. And in this collection, you will have one call, and then you can continue to add other calls, where you create camel queries using the UTU camel builder, plugging them in here and then saying load data by object, go in here, build your query, connect to SharePoint, load your list items, execute it asynchronously. When you succeed, go in here and using reflection, move through all of the properties of the object that's been passed and get each one SharePoint field name and automatically then set the value from the SharePoint field. Now, this seems like a lot of code in the background, but the good part about this is that 90% of it is done with a generator, and I'll be able to show you that here in a minute. Most of this code is reusable. You're going to create, for any list, you're going to create your item, your expanded item, that's going to have your properties and your fields and nothing else, and then your collection that will have all the information it needs to be able to display it for you and do all the work in the background. The result is this. What we first had to do in our first project is we had to create all of our own SharePoint objects. We had to turn around and we had to tell the context to go out and get them. And then when they came back, we had to explicitly set all the properties and add the items through the dispatcher to the observable collection so it could finally make it. That's pretty cumbersome. Now, it looks a little bit more like this. And by using this basic object model, you're able to then turn around and create objects for any one of your lists and be able to list them and manipulate them however you like. And you see right here, this code doing the same amount of work as all of this. In addition, you have the ability to manipulate the items underneath. So if we expand this and add this to the deployment, you'll see now in our SharePoint Designer, we have our three different demonstration applications. Context Grid 2 is the first one that we did. Context Grid Start is the demo one, copy of I just showed you. Context Grid is the new one that I just created using the expanded object model. So now I'm able to go into SharePoint.
It's paid for?
If you do if it's called unlimited audio, but that's what they supply. Go to webinars.
Able to go into my demo here.
Well, what do we dial in on?
I edit this web part.
But some people may be connecting with their
and I configure it.
Try to click on some.
Well, why don't you just say to everybody?
Change it to the new one. The Context Grid XAP.
Please send please respond with any questions, and we'll make sure.
If they're in the questions mode, they can ask the questions. You remember that little chat?
And at this point, then, we have the same result,
Yep.
which is an auto-generated data grid that we can then extend, filled with SharePoint items, with nothing more than the code that you see on this page right here. As all the code that happens in these background objects, 99% of the code is reusable from object to object. The only thing that has to change is what list you're accessing. And so it is very easy to develop, to use these projects as templates, and to develop a generator. I did one in one day that turned around, would read all the lists from a SharePoint site, kick them out into an output class that we can see. Here it is, Contacts Collection.
You know what the problem is?
What?
You're not muted.
We have all of our objects and events and everything that we need to run this. This generator will be made available upon request to anybody who is interested in seeing it, and any of the code that anybody would like to be able to step through so they can see how the object model behind the scenes works. But at this point, the main goal of this session is to get you set up with being able to create a Silverlight SharePoint project, be able to deploy it, be able to debug it, and then quickly see the base book way of how to get connected, and then see how you can use an advanced object model to make your coding much easier. I understand that was a lot of code, and there was quite a bit to look at that had to move pretty quick, which is why this will be made available upon request afterwards. But at this point, I would be happy to open everything up to discussion if anybody has any questions or would like any more information. And John, are you there? Well, we need our, let's see here. We need our commander here to be able to give us the ability to have audio. And they seem to have dropped off the call. Then at this point, I will go ahead, after about 45 minutes of throwing code at you, I will go ahead and conclude this. Feel free to email either myself or Ambassador Consulting at the contact information sent out on this invite to get copies of the code and to ask me any questions regarding how to get all these things linked up, and if you have any problems connecting to SharePoint with Silverlight in your Visual Studio 2010 environment. In the future, on a follow-up, there will be a more advanced showing of how to use some of these objects in Silverlight to be able to show adding, deleting, updating of individual items, and to leverage a little bit more of the power of the Silverlight UI in combination with editing web part pages so that you are able to create an application composed of several Silverlight files that operate together as a large enterprise application. Thank you very much, everybody, and I look forward to speaking to you. Have a good day.
Tone?
Yes.
Tony and everyone, this is John Suit, the infrastructure manager for Ambassador. Tony, I didn't know if you wanted anybody to ask any questions through the question.
I'm sorry, I did. I couldn't find you. I couldn't find you earlier. I need you to open up the audio.
If you have connected to this with your microphone and speakers on your computer, you can enable your own audio. With the regular telephone number, it's not enabled.
All right. Why don't I make you the presenter then? And are you able to open up the audio? Because I am speaking on the phone.
It isn't that. It's how the actual individuals who are attending connected. If they use the regular telephone setting, it's not enabled. If they connected themselves using their microphone and speakers, they should have that option.
I see. Well, it sounds like we may have to do a follow-up call with a Q&A if anybody would like to do so, because I don't know that I'm going to be able to hear anybody on this conference.
Yeah, the alternative would be if anybody wants to type their questions into the questions panel in a GoToWebinar, they're more than welcome to do that. Or they can send via an email to either myself at jsuit@ambassadorsolutions.com, and I can forward those to you, Tony, also.
Okay. I'm going ahead and right now and I'm typing out anybody who would like to pose any questions. I know that was a lot of code and a lot of stuff really fast. I think a lot of people will probably be mostly interested in getting a copy of the demo project.
Correct.
But if anybody would like to chat any questions to me, I would be perfectly willing to answer them at this time.
Oh, Patrick Tidrow has asked, was it recorded? Yes, this was being recorded. What we are going to do is convert this and put it out on Ambassador Solutions' YouTube site. We'll be sending that link to everyone within the next day or two once we convert it and upload it to YouTube.
Anything else?
If nobody has any more questions then, Tony, is anybody chatting anything to you?
I am not seeing anything now.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and end the webinar. Like I said, we'll be sending out a follow-up email to everyone who attended. We will convert this recording to a YouTube format, uploaded on Ambassador Solutions' YouTube site, and we will be mailing out that information to you within the next day or two. I want to thank you again, Tony. Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank everyone who attended. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to more of these webinars in the future.
You are welcome. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.